This is a presentation of the theory of cultural ecology. This research is meant to further define the theory and examine some current case studies to see how it is applied today. So to begin, let's address the question, what is cultural ecology? Cultural ecology, in its most basic form, is the idea that culture is an adaptive response to a given people's environment. Cultural ecology seeks to evaluate how cultures in similar environments develop similar cultural practices. So it's important to discuss what cultural ecology is not. Cultural ecology, or the ecological approach, is not environmental determinism. Environmental determinism is the theory that a given people's environment determines their culture, meaning that the environment is the sole factor in cultural formation, whereas cultural ecology sees the environment as shaping but not defining a culture. Julian Stewart coined the term cultural ecology and was in essence the founder of the approach. He was not the first anthropologist to study a people's habitat in relation to their culture, but he was the first to associate cultural processes as responses to environmental stimuli. Stewart encountered opposition to his theory by people known as anti-environmentalists. They argued that similar cultures could be found in differing environments, and that similar environments could produce differing cultures. Stewart worked in a multitude of places, but he was most notably known for his work with the Great Basin and Southwest regions, in addition to his works in Peru and Puerto Rico. Stewart also disliked the separation of the fields of archaeology and cultural anthropology. He saw them as inseparable parts of the discipline and practiced them as such. Following Stewart's education and his field research, he secured a job at Columbia, and it was here that the ecological approach was most popularized in academia. This was where he wrote Cultural Causality and Law. The Theory of Cultural Change was published while he taught at the University of Illinois following his stay at Columbia. So now let's discuss an example of cultural ecology. The Ladakhi are a high-desert northern Indian people. The Ladakh is an incredibly demanding environment. Water is scarce, making subsistence agriculture a difficult task. Frequent variance in temperature, high levels of solar radiation, and low oxygen also contribute to this difficulty. In response to this harsh ecosystem, the Ladakhi have developed cultural practices to help overcome the severity of the environment. The main phenomenon of Ladakhi life centers around their practice of polyandry, which was undoubtedly a response to the environment's carrying capacity. In addition to polyandry, the Ladakhi practice female primogeniture. Ladakhi custom further mandates that the firstborn female be the only reproducing female of that generation. Ladakhi religious beliefs also aid in reducing population growth. Many Ladakhi are Buddhist and choose to be celibate. Another aspect of the ecological approach is ecocultural niche modeling. This case study utilizes ECNM to analyze the adaptive systems of the prehistoric Batagulian culture in relation to the ecological niches they occupied. The significance of this approach is that it allows anthropologists to quantitatively assess whether or not a given culture is framed by environmental constraints. The site of Batagul is located in central France. They found that this culture was occupying two specific geographic ranges, and that the archaeologists of this project were trying to determine through ECNM whether these two distinct subcultures ecologically differed. At first it was thought that the Batagulian people were a group evolved from the Upper Solutrean peoples, but lithic evaluations disproved this. As one French archaeologist puts it, the Batagulian were certainly newcomers to this area, and clumsy in napping and retouching flint. In other words, their material culture was reflective of an unfamiliarity with the environment, lending evidence to the theory that they had emigrated into the area. The statistical results of the modeling show that there was a significant overlap between the two reconstructed ecological niches of the Batagulian geographic groups, meaning they occupied the same niche and that there was no significant difference between the groups ecologically. They did note, however, that the two territories had climates that differed, which is what most likely attributed the non-significant distinctions in niches. So now that we've discussed the ecological niches of humans in their environment, let's examine the social niches of plant and animal species within a culture. There's a relatively new term called a cultural keystone species. Now, a keystone species in ecology can be defined as an organism that is significant to the functionality of a specific environment. Therefore, a cultural keystone species, as defined by Platon, is a species that have essential roles in maintaining any level of complexity within a social ecological system. So how can we identify cultural keystones? First and foremost, a cultural keystone is critical to the identity of a people. The keystone is often wide-ranging in its functions and takes hold in multiple areas of culture, especially in economics, spirituality, or for subsistence. Now Now here's an example of a people and their cultural keystone. The Wapishana are an indigenous group living in tropical Guyana in South America. Their cultural keystone is a plant known as cassava. The plant has a starchy edible root, which is the Wapishana's main means of subsistence. The planting, tending, and processing of the cassava dictates much of the daily social and economic life for the Wapishana. Cassava has a highly involved system of processing. The processing itself is mainly conducted by the women, who spend much of their day peeling, grating, and cooking cassava. As for the men, the processed cassava is taken along on hunting and fishing trips for sustenance and is supplemented by wild foods. Here you can see how cassava, essentially an economic and subsistence crop, shapes other areas of Wapishana society. Another aspect of cultural ecology can be examined through what is known as traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK. Traditional ecological knowledge is the knowledge that has been passed down generationally regarding a culture's environment that has allowed them to survive in that environment. A really interesting case study of TEK and its implications for wildlife management is that of the Nunavut Inuit of Canada. This culture not only utilizes TEK for the management of their lands, but has also created a list of principles known as the Inuit Kalyamaya Tutkangit, or IQ for short, which is basically a guide on how to conceptualize animal and human relationships. Not only has the Nunavut's environment been the total centrality of Nunavut spirituality and subsistence, but has now come to literally govern them. The Nunavut Inuit have enacted a wildlife bill known as the Nunavut Wildlife Act that is rooted in their beliefs and conceptualizations of human-animal relations. Now, the Nunavut are not only culturally defined by their TEK and IQ, but legally as well. And here are my sources. Thanks for watching!